Hey, on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are talking with David Louis from Australia. He's written a new book called When Hope Falls. It's actually the first book in the trilogy. There's also When Hope Fights and When Hope Dawns that's coming out in April. It's a three-book trilogy about the real life story of a girl named Maya who was human trafficked from Thailand in Myanmar, and her story of her and her family. And we go through the whole book series, talk about the state of human trafficking, all this sort of thing. It's an absolutely fascinating conversation with a man who's a clinical psychologist from Hong Kong who works in Australia. And he's a bit young at only 28, but it's a fascinating conversation all the same. And the book is definitely a must read. So he's not on the front lines of it all, but he's involved. And so it's a very interesting sort of thing. So we'll appreciate this conversation. And yeah, here it comes. This is the Cameron Journal podcast. Let's go. This is the Cameron Journal podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. And it's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, we are welcome David Louis, who is the author of When Hope Calls, a human trafficking story. We're excited to talk about this all the way from Australia, which the coordination across a day and 18 hours, time coordination is no easy thing, but we've managed it. And we're going to talk about his book on human trafficking and what inspired it and all this sort of thing. So should be an interesting conversation. Welcome, David, to the Cameron Journal podcast. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Cameron. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you. So let's, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the book?
Okay. So it's always a bit hard to introduce myself because my main career is I am a clinical psychologist and I've been training for the past 6 years in the field. But in the meantime, I have also been writing a lot on the side. And When Hope Calls, a human trafficking story was written, I think, a couple of years ago. It was actually published on 2017 in August. So that is a while ago now. And I wrote it in the beginning as a short story. It was based on a little one sentence story I first read in the book by my mentor who worked with the UN for 15 years. And then he learned a lot about human trafficking and became an advocate. And then I read this book written by him. And in it, there was this one story about this girl who who gets kidnapped and then who manages to keep her phone and then make a call to a humanitarian NGO, and then they try to rescue her. And so, based on that one sentence story, I wrote the short story, and then by the end of that, it was 60 pages or so, and I realized, well, I guess I have to do something with it now. Published it, did pretty well. It's still doing pretty well, and so I've written the second one, and now coming out will be the third one as well.
Excellent, excellent. Well, it sounds like it's been a whole kind of journey, and that was
Yeah.
an interesting kind of way to get into it. So what got you in, besides meeting this person in the UN, what
Hmm.
got you into writing this story? What made it compelling? What kept you going?
Yeah. I think what kept me really going was the ambiguity of the ending. The funny thing is, my mentor actually never told me the ending, and he just told me to write it and to imagine what happens. And so I think what really gets me is that actually represents the endings for so many human trafficking victims. And even for survivors, it feels often like their lives have just kind of trailed off and has become something that is not theirs, over which they have no control. And for most of the human trafficking victims, we statistically we don't know what happens to them. Even after they get rescued, some of them could go back into human trafficking, or they could just disappear somehow, go into all sorts of trouble as well. And so, yeah, for me, is that open ending. It's one that both instills a bit of hope, but also leaves some room for questions and for self reflection. I think on the top part of readers, and yeah, if you read it, you realize that the ending is kind of has leaves you with that sense of, oh, so what now and what's next, and that's I think that's what really kept me going.
Yeah, I that's definitely compelling. So what is it? I mean, obviously, like someone being, kidnapped and sold like cattle and sheep is heart-wrenching
Mm,
enough. But what
mm.
is it about this, this story that is the most gut-wrenching part? What do you think is the hardest bit?
Oh, I think when I wrote it, one of the most there's a scene where one of the humanitarian workers is so frustrated with going down a dead end in terms of a clue that they found in the phone call that he throws a marker across the room, and he just kind of is frustrated about how helpless everything is or how useless he feels. And I think interestingly, the parallel was me writing the book because by the end of it, I was invested in the story and I was thinking, oh, does the girl get saved or not? And it was gut wrenching. Just the idea that I had to end the story in a way that wasn't satisfying. I think that really pained me. And from a book branding and writing point of view, such endings aren't the greatest because everyone wants happy ending, and myself included. So having to write that and make that kind of creative decision, but also a realistic decision in being true to the stories of a lot of survivors or a lot of victims, I think, yeah, it really took a lot of me. And it's something that I think even to this day, it keeps that story really vivid in my mind because of that ending, because of what I had to do to readers. Sorry for readers in advance, but yeah.
Yeah, so that I mean, but it is difficult, but that kind of, as you said, is kind of how human trafficking ends up, even in the best case
Mm,
scenario.
yeah.
It doesn't necessarily, mean that they people go off and,
Mm, right
have
off
a
in the
happy ending
sunset.
of their,
Yeah.
yeah, right, kind of what happens the day after is still difficult because you have,
Mm.
the trauma from that,
Oh,
and
100%. Yeah.
and there might, especially, in this day and age, they're probably in a foreign country, don't speak the language, don't have
100%.
documents. How are they going to get home,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah. And
There's kind of
yeah.
all these issues and problems, and their
Mm,
situation that they came from might not have been good either. So what do you do with
yeah.
that? I mean,
Totally.
yeah, we have we have to think about this a lot in our country because of our southern border immigration problem. So this is
Oh,
a
okay.
hot
Oh,
topic
okay.
for us
Okay.
here in the United States,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
like
That's
these
true.
kids walk up, from Central America through Mexico,
Yeah.
2,000 miles.
Yeah.
Sometimes they come with their parents, frequently they don't. And it's
That's
like,
crazy. Yeah.
what are you going to do with them?
Yeah. 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 And
You
I think
know?
it's such a divisive issue on a national level and on a political level. But I think one of my beliefs is if you look at someone in the face, their story suddenly makes sense. And for us, like writers or readers, it's like we are choosing to put that picture of someone else right up close, and we're spending time in their shoes, literally sometimes. And even as a psychologist, that's my job really to put myself in people's shoes. But yeah, like just the fact that when you hear the stories face to face and you see a kid who has walked that far with barely any shoes and with no family and no support, there is something to be said about what political things to do, what kind of decisions must be made. But there's also something to be said about human side that's touched by stories, by the power of everyone's stories when you hear it face to face.
No, and I think that's why it's probably, it's really good that you've done this, because
Mm,
human trafficking is something that I think there are people that are aware that it goes on, but it's not
Yeah.
really usually near anybody's everyday experience.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so it can be hard to bring it out of the abstract into something
Mm,
concrete.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
that's very
whereas
true.
conversely, in some countries like Malaysia or the Philippines or Laos, all this type of thing, people live with the threat of this all the time. Kids go
Yeah,
missing
yeah,
and are oftentimes never seen again, and they're lost to this opaque world.
yeah, yeah. And it's just this world, and this opaque world really looks different in every country. I think there is no standard form of a human trafficking ring. Um,
No,
is yeah, no, like as much
they're
as
making up their own rules, doing their own thing. Yeah,
exactly,
you
exactly.
know.
And even in America, I've heard that in different states it looks vastly different. And there's some that are seasonal. For example, the NFL, I think, the what's it called? The really big one, Super Bowl. Yes. So during the Super Bowl, there are trafficking rings that operate solely during the Super Bowls because the amount of foot traffic is so great and the business is booming at those events for human
Yes.
trafficking. And so,
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
No, I mean that's like it's the same thing with like they of the local for the cities that host the political conventions for the major political parties. The local
Oh
sex
yeah, yeah,
workers make out like bandits. And oftentimes,
yeah.
and people don't know this, the federal government actually will come through and kind of clean up crime in the city in question to get ready for the
Oh,
convention to come to town. Denver hosted the
that makes sense.
2012 Democratic Convention. And it was like a
Right.
2 year FBI thing that kind of cleaned up the city before the convention came to town.
Wow, 2 years. You really started early on that.
Yes, yes. So, like in 2010, they were doing
Yeah.
this in preparation for 2012 because they're announced years in advance. Um,
Right. Right.
and try to clean up some of the stuff. I mean, yeah, I mean, anytime you have large concentrations of people with money who are willing to pay for
Mm,
services
yeah.
of the not exactly legal variety,
Yeah.
somebody's going to be there to fulfill that need.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Supply and demand.
Exactly. And I think that's the most tragic part about human trafficking is at some point it's just economics
Yeah. That's really sad. I mean, one
and
of the
greed.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So one of the formative movies that really impacted me was Nefarious. I don't know if you watched it or heard of it, but it's a documentary about this group of filmmakers who go around to different countries and looks at the human trafficking and sex work and intersection of that. And it's just all economics. Like at that point, they're not treated as humans. They treat it as products that can be consumed and reconsumed, and it's almost like unlimited. So they're worth more than drugs in that sense. And it's just really sad seeing people objectified like that.
Yeah, well, and that I mean that gets into, all people don't really talk about it anymore, but like sex tourism in Asia, that
Yeah,
sort of
it's
thing.
huge,
Yes.
huge.
Yes, and that, and that sort of thing, going on and people would be shocked to hear this, but not everybody there willingly signed up to be there. And
Exactly.
sometimes that can be someone forcing you to do it and sometimes that can be, you are the, fourth son of a poor rural
Mm,
Thai farmer and so
yes,
you're sent to
exactly.
Bangkok to be a Thai ladyboy because you can make gobs of money and
Exactly.
help support your family. You know,
Exactly.
that's I mean, we call that like, oh, they freely did it, but did they really,
Yeah, yeah.
sort of thing?
It's
Or was it
life.
just a
Yeah,
matter
yeah.
of economics? Like,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
does, does that what would you have done that if you didn't have that economic pressure at
Yes.
home?
Exactly. I see it as similar
And
to like
God bless
selling
those who
organs.
do, but
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's speaking from a place of privilege to assume everyone who works in the industry is willing. It's that, we don't see that in Southeast Asia, there's many things that you can do to earn money. And when you have contact with tourists who come for different reasons, different tastes, then of course money becomes, the most lucrative thing that you can leave your village for to support your whole family.
Yeah. And then unfortunately, I think again going back to economics creates an
Mm,
economic pressure situation where you have, people going to these big cities, they don't know anybody, and therefore they can be taken advantage of, or
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same thing that happens with, they hire these young women from these Asian countries to go to the Middle East to work as nannies and au pairs, and they end up,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
I mean, that's a whole thing that's been well documented. That's
Even to
also,
Europe
human
is
trafficking.
crazy.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
also human trafficking. And these women aren't allowed to call their families or leave. Their documents are
yeah,
taken from them,
yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
sorts of horrible things, you
Yeah.
know.
I think recently there was one in London or a few like really established cities that have that. I'm actually from Hong Kong. I think Hong Kong has something like that as well in the domestic workers.
Yeah. No, I mean
Yeah.
yeah, it's a quite, they found some in Canada and Vancouver. They found,
Yeah.
some here in the United States, all this type
Yeah.
of thing. So I mean, yeah, I mean it is something where it's like, this is not only is it a problem, it's a, thanks to air travel, it quickly becomes a global problem.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
how awful it is when you're leaving your Filipino village thinking you're going to make good money for your family, all this type of thing, only to be trapped and taken advantage of in
Yeah.
every way. And I do mean every way.
Yeah.
It's a tragedy all around. It's a
Yeah.
tragedy all
Yeah.
around. Yeah.
And it's for the greatest purpose. I feel like they want to support their families. Like, I totally respect that. And I think there is that much more strength to be seen in those survivors who come out the other end and get to tell their stories. But for every one good story, for every one rescue we hear about, there's like at least 100, if not thousands more untold, unseen.
Yes. Yeah, yes. Well, and that's even extends to people who are taken advantage of by people trying to get them to cross the border. Like in this country, you
Yeah.
have the coyotes who drive people over the border from Mexico to the United
Right.
States.
Right.
You have those poor people in the boats from Timor-Leste
Oh
rowing to
yeah.
Australia.
Oh man. Don't even
And that's just
don't
one
get me
tragedy
started.
after
Yeah.
another. I mean, you row
Exactly.
your boat. That's a long way from Indonesia. Sort of
Yes,
thing. So
yes. Yeah. And once they get here, they put on Christmas Island or something.
yeah, it's yeah. I mean, that's it just. I mean, just over and over. And these people, they give these people, all the money they have in the world, hoping to
Mm,
get to a better situation with no
yeah.
guarantee and no recourse.
Mm. Yeah. And
It's a
it's
Yeah, it's a tragic situation.
yeah.
Yeah. So tell me about, speaking of all this though, tell me about your
Yes.
research process. How did you look into this? How did you gather the data and the
Yeah.
zeitgeist to make it happen?
Yeah. It's I think it's both academic and kind of fictional work. So academic side is definitely looking into the research, looking into different human trafficking sites, but it was difficult to kind of collate all the data because every country presents it differently and they're often not up to date. So I really had to hone in on the statistics in Thailand, in Burma, Myanmar. And then, once I have the statistics for that, it'll be drawing from my own experiences being in those countries. I've been to Thailand a few times, and also just based on questions that I've asked my mentor and also at different NGOs, because I was working with an NGO at the time. I was doing videography work with them. So I got to ask them some questions about the situations. But yeah, at the end of the day, it really is down to the details. I think when you read about stories like this, readers want to feel like they're in that world. And so drawing in on the textural things, such as I had to Google whether there were any sunflower fields along the way from Burma to Thailand, because that's one of the key things that happens. So it's like very small details, but then also getting the statistics right, the numbers right. I find that, I hope that comes across to readers, and because it really does for me add to the reality or the authenticity of the story.
How, as a side note, how did you get from Hong Kong to Australia?
Oh, that's a different
Because for a
journey.
clinical
Yeah,
psychologist, you're doing videography for an NGO. You're living a very interesting life. I
yeah.
feel like we should know more. What's going on?
Right. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I lived there until 2 years ago. So I'm 28 now. I lived until I was 26. But a couple summers ago, I started working with an NGO, and I was filming videos for them. They went to I followed them to Nepal, Cambodia, and Thailand just to film stuff for them. And then we went to Jordan and Israel, visited some refugee shelters there, did some filming there as well. Came back and I finished up the second book. And I started working as a school counselor in Hong Kong for a year and a half after finishing my first master's degree. And then after working as a school counselor, I got accepted into the clinical psychology program here. And so I moved here myself and just for that program. And I just graduated in December. And now I'm working as a psychologist registrar in a private practice. That's that's some of the things that I've been up to, I guess, and writing books along the way.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's why I asked. It sounded like you were doing something interesting, and I thought it was worth finding out more. So I'm glad we have done. I'm glad we have done. So that's a fascinating sort of thing. So I'm glad you've done this. So can you give us a quick run through of the plot? What's the journey we go on in this book?
Right. So let me just refresh myself with the blurb because
I have to do the same thing because once I'm done with the book, I've like moved on. So by the time I do the interviews for it, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I wrote that. What is this book about? Let's find out together.
And then I read it. I'm like, whoa, this is actually kind of good.
Yeah, it's like, oh, interesting. I should keep reading. Like, it's
Like, I want to know what happened. Oh wait, I know what ending. Dang. Okay, so it's actually based on a true story. As I said, the one sentence story, but there's a lot of details that I made up, I dramatized. The ending I've kept true to the original, and it really tells the story at the end of the day about a little girl who gets kidnapped by two Thai gangsters. And she was taken in Burma and smuggled across the border to Thailand. Unbeknownst to the kidnappers, the little girl called Maya has kept hold of a phone, and she manages to make a call to an NGO that specializes in human trafficking work, anti-human trafficking work. And then they realized upon the phone call that they were very ill-equipped to help her, and so they started gathering more staff from different organizations to bring them in to try to rescue her. And within the next 12 hours, so the whole ordeal just happens within 12 hours. They all kind of tested to the limits. They all try to find clues based on the background noise, based on things that she tells them. And I'm not going to spoil the ending, but you probably would have guessed it by now. It is a very realistic and a bit of a sad story, but also goes to show, I think I want to show two things. Through this story, you'll be able to see kind of the point of view of the victim, but then also the point of view of people who try to rescue these victims and how sometimes how helpless it can feel for them.
Yeah, it's since you're kind of in this world, what do you think, what do you think the world can do to try to slow down on this human trafficking problem?
That's
not
a great
to put you out of business, but what could have be done to prevent this book from being written? I don't mean to put you out of business, but
please put me out of business. That's a great question. I think if you ask different professionals from different fields, you have different answers. But for me, because I'm not fully in the industry, I'm not fully in the front lines, but I'd say awareness is actually underrated. It's a hot topic at certain times. I don't know if you've noticed that, certain years we get a lot of talk about human trafficking and it just disappears in the background and then it comes back again. So I think awareness is important because it's awareness that informs action. It's not the type that you just know about it and then you just move on with your life. Is that I believe if everyone at an airport in Thailand knows about human trafficking and knows about the effects, then when they see sex tourists, maybe, then they will come to understand what they can do to help the little girls that they're often holding almost hostage. And without that awareness, there really can be nothing done. Like, I think all the police in the world can't stop human trafficking. It really is down to every single individual on every flight, in every airport terminal, or just in any major city, whether it's Atlanta or it's Hong Kong or Chicago. Like, if everyone's aware, then I really do believe that pimps and gangsters would have a much harder time trafficking anyone. And, even for those Johns, who go to, who employ those kind of services, I'm not judging them or anything, but for them, I think they should be aware that there are workers who are willing and there are workers who are coerced or forced. And if they're aware of that, I really do believe that they can also help against human trafficking and help the victims when they do, if they ever do come across them. So awareness, I think, is the answer for people like us.
Definitely. I certainly see that. And I think that is, with these types of things, if you can shine a light on it, the rats and cockroaches will go back and hide under the fridge where they belong. So
exactly.
it's, rather than just waltzing around the kitchen openly.
Which they are, yeah.
Yes, definitely. Yes. I grew up in the South where, you turn on the light in the kitchen in the summer and things scurry.
Oh. And then you hear it as well and doesn't help.
Yeah. It's and I know y'all have that down there, so I know you know what I'm talking about. But no,
oh man, yeah. Everything is trying to kill you here.
Yes, no. That's why I always tell people, I'm kind of like, I don't understand why people live in a place where everything's trying to kill you. Like, the spiders are too big, the animals are strange.
Yeah.
Yes, like it's a good thing I wasn't in charge of the British expedition, because I would have taken one look at that and been like, nope, we're going home. Pack it up, everybody. We're getting out of here. This place is not fit for man nor beast. Like,
no. But the beaches are nice, I must say.
That is true. That is very true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've come to that portion of the show where we do our plugs. So let us know where we can find you, follow you online, and buy the book.
Right. Perfect. All right. So this is the worst part, probably, self-marketing. But you can just go on Amazon, on the Kindle store, and search When Hope Calls, a true human trafficking story, and it should pop up. And the author name is David Lui, Lui, and it's a part of a trilogy. So when you click into it, there'll be 3 books. The second one is called When Hope Fights, and it actually it's all about the story of Maya's older brother, who goes to try to find her in Thailand. And in doing so, he has to join the gang who kidnapped her in the first place. And it's much more exciting. It's probably double the length. And the third one, When Hope Dawns, is on pre-order now, available in April, so very soon. And it follows the story of Maya and also her mother and her brother. So all 3 stories start to intertwine and gets a bit exciting. And we get to find out what happened to Maya after her kidnapping. And all of them are available. Yeah.
Yes. No, that's very exciting. So excellent. Well,
and my website. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just my website. Yeah. Sorry, real quick. It's David SM Lui. So davidsmlui.com. And right now it's just one page where it takes you to the pre-order of my upcoming book.
Yes, When Hope Dawns. That's
Thank
excellent.
you.
Yeah, no, it's good. That'll be excellent to have that in April, and that means we have a couple weeks to go read the other 2, so we're up to date.
Yeah. Oh, trust me, it'll only take 2 days.
So, it gives us a chance to get up to speed before we find out the ultimate conclusion of what happens to this little family. So, excellent. So, I know we did plugs, but I'm going to ask this question anyway. Yeah. For you personally, what did you go through at a personal level talking about reading and working on these books? Because there's 3 of them. Yeah. What were you going through with all that?
I think it's an interesting time for me to be writing these books. I think there's a lot of displacement going on in the world, and in my own life, adjusting to a new country as a foreigner, and just helping people psychologically as well to understand the impact of trauma on psychology. I think all of these together really put me in a new perspective of looking at the human experience as capital T's trauma and also lowercase t, where everyone at every walk of life and at every age can encounter so much trauma. And I see that in domestic abuse, I see that in bullying, I see that in so many different stories. And so I think increasingly for me, the story of Maya and of human trafficking victims is a tip of the iceberg. It is really, for me, it opens the window to a much larger scenery that is stormy and dark and rainy, and nobody has umbrellas there. So I see so much more need in the world now that I'm writing this. And the more I write it, the more stories I find, the more I want to write about it, because I feel that, I don't know if you remember in the musical Hamilton, it's like, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And that really touched me because having someone tell your story means you live on. It means you're a legend in a certain way. And I think me telling the story of these victims allows them to live on and makes their suffering a bit more meaningful, in that it can be used to raise awareness for every reader, and so that they can help people not be like Maya, to be rescued, to not be kidnapped in the first place. And if that's the power of story, then I will never stop writing the story. Like, I don't care if what happens to me, it's just part of my DNA and part of my belief in how to make the world a better place.
No, absolutely. I teach a class called The Power of Story, where I teach about the importance of that. So yeah. You're much nicer than I am, because when I'm a guy, but when I read about some of this stuff, I get real rad femme, and I'm kind of like, kill all men. I'll start with myself. Someone hand me a gun or a knife. Like, I'm just kind of like, I'm like, are you so desperate for a date or sex you're willing to fly thousands of miles? I'm like, I don't want to go see someone who lives on the wrong side of Seattle. I cannot imagine getting on a plane and flying over oceans. Like, that's just way too much work. Like, it is. I just don't understand.
No, trust me, I had that phase too. I was like, I hate all men. All men are pigs. As I wrote the guy characters in the book, I was like, man, I hate this. Why do I have to talk like him? Why do I think like him? I hate it.
No, like, I definitely get into some like masculine self-loathing when I start talking about these topics. Like, because I'm just kind of like, we are awful. We really are.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my gender. I'm really sorry.
Like, it's, I have a couple of my super fans who will be listening to this in their cars, and they will be pulling over and cheering that we've said this. So this is really for them. But I'm bisexual, and I have a couple of my female friends that are kind of like, I know you haven't dated guys in a while, but can we just like hate on men for a while? And I'm just kind of like, who did you go out with, and what did he do to you? Like, let's just hear the whole thing.
Let's hate on that. Let's do it.
Like,
spill the tea.
Yeah, exactly. It just kind of becomes a whole sad thing. But yeah, it's, I mean, I think that's good. Like I said, you're so much more zen, because I get just be kind of like, this isn't necessary. Like, of all the things in the world, like, we don't need to be doing this, folks.
We don't. We've got 99 problems, and this doesn't have to be one.
Exactly. And that's a good place to end. Thank you so much, David, for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me, Cameron. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And, thank you for your time.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.